When we hear the name Ivan the Terrible, most of us imagine a bloodthirsty tyrant, a man consumed by madness and cruelty. But the real question is, was Ivan born a monster, or was he shaped into one by the brutal world around him? His life story forces us to face this disturbing puzzle. Ivan's full name was Ivan IV Vasilyevich. He was born on August 25, 1530, in Moscow. His family, the Rurik dynasty, had ruled parts of Russia for centuries, and Ivan was destined to inherit this legacy. His father, Grand Prince Vasily III, was a powerful ruler. But fate struck Ivan hard and early. When Ivan was only 3 years old, his father died. Suddenly, the young boy was left in the care of his mother, Alina Glinskaya, who took on the role of regent. She tried to protect her son and preserve his claim to power, but medieval Russian politics were nothing less than a snake pit. Bojars, the noble families, were hungry for power, and they saw Ivan as nothing more than a weak child standing between them and control of the throne. And then tragedy struck again. When Ivan was just 8 years old, his mother died under mysterious circumstances. Many believe she had been poisoned, likely by the same boyars who had tormented Ivan's family. In that instant, the future Tsar became an orphan. Imagine a child growing up inside the stone walls of the Kremlin, surrounded not by love and care, but by manipulation, neglect, and cruelty. Ivan and his younger brother Andrei were often left hungry, shivering without warm clothes, abandoned by the very nobles who should have been protecting them. Later, Ivan himself would recall how he was left alone in the palace courtyards for hours, with no one to comfort him. Sometimes, he would feed scraps of bread to stray dogs, clinging to them for the companionship he never received from humans. Those early scars cut deep. They taught Ivan one lesson. The world is merciless, and power can only be held through fear. That lonely, wounded child would grow into a ruler who embodied those very truths. At just 16 years old, Ivan took a bold and unprecedented step. Instead of declaring himself merely the Grand Prince of Moscow, as his father and grandfather had done, Ivan crowned himself Tsar of all Russia. The word Tsar was derived from Caesar, and by adopting it, Ivan sent a clear message. He was not just a local ruler, he was the emperor of a rising Russian state. This was more than a title, it was a vision of Russia as a centralized empire, united under his hand. During those early years, Ivan surprised many by ruling with wisdom. He introduced reforms, strengthened the justice system, cracked down on corruption, and even expanded Russia's territories. To his people, this young Tsar looked like the hope of a new era. But Ivan's story wasn't only about politics, it was also about love, and the cruel way fate stole it from him. In 1547, Ivan married Anastasia Romanovna, a young noblewoman from the Romanov family. For the first time, Ivan experienced something he had never known in his childhood: tenderness, affection, and trust. Anastasia became his anchor, the one person who calmed the storms inside him. Chroniclers say that while Anastasia lived, Ivan was a far gentler ruler. Her influence softened his paranoia, and her presence gave him stability. But that peace was not destined to last. After 13 years of marriage, Anastasia suddenly fell ill and died. Ivan was convinced she had been poisoned by the boyars, just as his mother had been. Whether true or not, the loss shattered him. Her death ripped open the old wounds of his childhood, the betrayals, the poisonings, the endless suspicion. From this point forward, Ivan's darker side began to emerge. Love had briefly held back the monster inside him, but now, with Anastasia gone, there was nothing left to restrain him. After Anastasia's death, Ivan's personality began to change in frightening ways. The trauma of his youth, combined with his newfound paranoia, to create a ruler who trusted no one. Every smile looked like treachery, every ally a potential traitor. Although he had once appeared as a reformer, Ivan was slowly transforming into something far more dangerous. He began to build a system that concentrated absolute power in his hands. And most ominously, started preparing a force that would become infamous in Russian history, his private army of loyal enforcers. Men who would act as his shadow, carrying out his darkest desires. This was the beginning of the Reign of Terror. Ivan the Terrible was no longer just the boy who had suffered at the hands of others. Now he was preparing to unleash his pain on an entire nation. When Ivan IV first sat on the throne, many believed he might usher in a golden era for Russia. He had shown signs of intelligence, a strong sense of justice, and even religious devotion. But power, unchecked and absolute, has a way of revealing a man's true nature. And for Ivan, the mask of civility soon began to slip. One of the first cracks in his mind came with personal tragedy. In 1560, his beloved first wife, Anastasia Romanovna, suddenly fell ill and died. To Ivan, this wasn't just the loss of a companion. Anastasia had been the one person who calmed his darker impulses, who softened his temper, and perhaps the only one he truly trusted. Without her, his paranoia grew like a raging fire. Ivan became convinced that his enemies had poisoned her, though no real proof existed. This obsession with betrayal would shape the rest of his rule. From that point forward, Ivan the Terrible transformed into a ruler who saw treason in every corner. Tsar Russia's noble families became his favorite targets. He accused them of plotting against him, of conspiring with foreign enemies, and of undermining his authority. Now, some may have been guilty, but many were not. Ivan did not care. He unleashed punishments so cruel that even in an age when brutality was common, his actions shocked people. One of his most infamous creations was the Oprichnina. In 1565, Ivan announced a radical plan. He divided Russia into two parts. One was the traditional territory, run by boyars and officials. The other was the Oprichnina, a land directly under Ivan's control, where his secret police, the Oprichniki, enforced his will with absolute power. The Oprichniki were a terrifying force. Dressed in black, riding black horses, they carried a severed dog's head and a broom on their saddles. Symbols of their mission to sniff out traitors and sweep away Ivan's enemies, they became notorious for torture, executions, and public spectacles of cruelty. Families were wiped out, entire towns punished for supposed disloyalty. To cross the Oprichniki was to invite death in the most horrific ways imaginable. Ivan used this force not only to eliminate rivals, but to instill fear across Russia. He understood that terror could be more effective than loyalty. Villages burned, nobles executed, thousands of innocents slaughtered, all in the name of protecting the Tsar. It was a reign of psychological warfare, where anyone at any time could be accused of treason. But Ivan's paranoia didn't stop with his nobles. It turned on his own family as well. His reign is most tragically remembered for the shocking event in 1581, when he struck his own son and heir, Ivan Ivanovich, in a fit of rage. Accounts suggest the argument began when Ivan accused his son's pregnant wife of being immodest. The Tsar beat her so severely that she miscarried. When his son confronted him, Ivan lashed out violently, striking him with his scepter. The blow proved fatal. The image of Ivan cradling his dying son, screaming in grief at what he had done, is one of the most haunting in Russian history. A man who had destroyed thousands of lives had now destroyed his own future. His surviving son, Fyodor, was weak and unfit to rule, and Ivan's dynasty would end with him. The murder of his heir was not just a personal tragedy, it was a turning point that destabilized Russia for decades to come. But before that ultimate collapse, Ivan continued to wage wars that drained the nation. He sought to expand Russia's territory, battling the powerful Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and the Kingdom of Sweden. These wars were costly, both in treasure and in lives. Cities were burned, peasants conscripted, and hunger spread across the land. What victories he did achieve came at the price of immense suffering for ordinary Russians. One of the darkest episodes of his rule was the massacre of Novgorod in 1570. Ivan became convinced that the wealthy city was plotting to betray him to Lithuania. In response, he marched on Novgorod with his Oprichniki. What followed was a bloodbath. Men, women, and children were tortured and drowned in the freezing Volkhov River. Churches were looted, homes destroyed, and the city's prosperity shattered. The massacre is remembered as one of the worst atrocities of his reign, a chilling symbol of his paranoia and cruelty. Yet Ivan was not simply a madman with no vision. He was contradictory, a ruler of extremes. On one hand, he established reforms in law, governance, and the military. He helped lay the foundations of a centralized Russian state, extending Moscow's influence far beyond its old borders. He even promoted cultural growth, commissioning works like St. Basil's Cathedral, with its iconic, colorful domes that still define Moscow's skyline today. But these achievements are forever overshadowed by the rivers of blood he spilled. Ivan's cruelty created a climate of terror that stifled progress, weakened the nobility, and left the Russian people traumatized. His successes were built on a foundation of fear and brutality, and they could not outlast him. By the late 1570s, Ivan's mental and physical health began to decline. He became increasingly unpredictable, swinging between religious repentance and violent outbursts. He confessed sins to priests one day and ordered massacres the next. Those close to him lived in constant fear of his shifting moods. His court became a place of whispers and suspicion, where survival depended on knowing when to stay silent. This was the Ivan the Terrible of legend, a man consumed by paranoia, capable of both genius and madness. He had transformed Russia into a centralized power, but at the cost of his people's lives and his own soul. As his reign dragged toward its final years, Russia itself was unraveling. His wars had drained resources, famine and plague stalked the land, and his dynasty was weakened beyond repair. Ivan had once dreamed of building an empire that would rival the great kingdoms of Europe. Instead, he left behind a broken country, scarred by his violence and haunted by his legacy. As Ivan grew older, his paranoia deepened. The young boy who had once been neglected and humiliated, the Tsar who had once dreamed of glory and order, had transformed into a man consumed by suspicion. He trusted no one, not his boyars, not his advisors, and sometimes not even his own family. By the late 1560s, Russia was under the grip of Ivan's darkest creation. These were Ivan's personal guards, his black-robed horsemen, who rode with dog heads and brooms hanging from their saddles. The dog heads symbolized their mission to hunt down treachery, while the brooms symbolized their duty to sweep Russia clean of traitors. But in practice, the Oprichniki were little more than executioners, torturers, and thieves. Entire towns lived in fear of them. Villages were burned to the ground on mere suspicion. One of the most infamous massacres was in the city of Novgorod in 1570. Ivan believed the people of Novgorod were secretly plotting with Lithuania to betray him. His response was swift and merciless. For weeks, his Oprichniki rounded up citizens, men, women, even children. They were drowned in the icy Volkhov River, beaten to death, or burned alive. Thousands perished in what many historians still call one of the darkest episodes in Russian history. Ivan himself oversaw the killings, moving through the city like a man possessed. Some say Ivan wept afterward, tormented by what he had done. Others say he felt nothing at all. The truth is probably somewhere in between. By now, Ivan was a man who believed that terror was his only weapon. The most infamous moment of Ivan's reign came not on the battlefield, nor in the courts, but within his own palace walls. In 1581, an argument erupted between Ivan and his eldest son, Tsarevich Ivan Ivanovich. Different accounts exist, but one version suggests the Tsar struck his pregnant daughter-in-law out of rage, causing her to miscarry. Horrified, the Tsarevich confronted his father. A heated quarrel followed, and in his fury, Ivan struck his son on the head with his scepter. The blow was fatal. The young prince, who many believed would have been a wise and capable ruler, died in his father's arms. There's a famous painting by Ilya Repin that captures the moment of Ivan. Wide-eyed and trembling, cradling the lifeless body of his son, the horror of what he had done written across his face. That moment sealed Ivan's legacy. Not only had he unleashed terror across his land, but he had also destroyed his own bloodline. His younger son, Fyodor, would inherit the throne, but Fyodor was weak and sickly, unfit to rule. Ivan's dynasty was doomed. In his final years, Ivan was a shadow of his former self. His once sharp mind had decayed under paranoia and perhaps even madness. He surrounded himself with astrologers, sorcerers, and holy men, desperately seeking signs of the future. He grew obsessed with death, with omens, with the afterlife. And yet, he remained a man of contradictions. He built churches, patronized art, and even corresponded with Queen Elizabeth I of England, proposing bizarre marriage alliances. One moment he could be charming and eloquent, the next he could order an execution without a flicker of remorse. In March 1584, while playing a game of chess, Ivan suddenly collapsed. Witnesses said he crossed himself, muttered a prayer, and died. Some whispered he had been poisoned. Others believed his body simply gave out after decades of rage and excess. He was 53 years old. So how should we remember Ivan IV, the man history calls Ivan the Terrible? The Russian word Grozny, often translated as terrible, doesn't quite mean what we think. A better translation might be Ivan the Fearsome, or Ivan the Formidable. And indeed, he was both. On one hand, Ivan expanded Russia's territory dramatically, transforming it into a sprawling empire that stretched deep into Siberia. He centralized power, weakening the Bozhars, and laid the foundations of the autocratic Tsardom that would dominate Russia for centuries. On the other hand, his reign was drenched in blood. His paranoia and brutality left scars that lasted generations. The Oprichnina devastated the economy and population. His killing of his son ensured instability, leading to what became known as the Time of Troubles, a chaotic period of famine, foreign invasion, and civil war. Perhaps the most haunting part of Ivan's story is how deeply personal trauma shaped his rule. How the neglected boy became the suspicious Tsar, the grieving widower became the vengeful tyrant. Every cruelty, every massacre seems to trace back to the wounds of his early life. In the end, Ivan the Terrible remains one of history's most complex figures, a man of brilliance and brutality. Faith and fear, vision and madness. He was the Tsar who dreamed of greatness, but left behind a kingdom trembling in terror. So, when we think of Ivan the Terrible, we are forced to confront a chilling question. Was he a product of his time? A ruler doing what he thought necessary to maintain power? Or was he something darker, a man whose personal demons consumed not just himself, but an entire nation? That's the paradox of Ivan IV. He gave Russia an empire, but he also gave it nightmares. More than 400 years later, the shadow of the terrible Tsar still lingers.